Hi, my name is Darren Bartlett and I love discussing African affairs. On every Saturday, I tend to pick out the biggest stories of the week, which I think we need to pay attention to. And, we go ahead but I welcome all your comments every now and then. So my big stories could be like three of the week. I know so much goes on the African continent here. I know that African leaders were in Japan where they signed over 300 agreements between each other. People like President Ramaphosa were, saying that we are not looking for donors. We're now looking for partners to develop the continent. And this goes on and on and on. I mean, there's this whole conversation in South Africa about the Bella Act, which I was trying to follow, but it's a case of bullying. So I said, let me leave those stories alone because, well, those are those that you can find. But these are my biggest stories that I think caught my attention. Number one. This one here, I know I mentioned about it, but it's about human rights in Zimbabwe. Okay, the situation, the reports that the United States Department released on Zimbabwe. And this is a report for 2024 to 2025. And a couple of things have been pointed out on Zimbabwe. I mean, for a very long time, Zimbabwe has faced issues, especially with the West, and to a point that they have sanctioned very many members of the ZANU-PF or members in the government of Zimbabwe, including the president himself, was sanctioned. But it's not the first time we see such a report come out. I mean, it's a stretch for a very long time. Even during the times of Robert Mugabe, the human rights reports usually come out and have been pointing about almost the same things. Almost the same things. For example, look at this. The report says that the government of Mnangagwa actually weaponizes the justice system. Okay, so it uses the justice system to actually clamp down on people or maybe members of the opposition, or for example people they don't agree with. And this is what they clearly state in that report. For example, the opposition leader by the names of Jameson Timber of the Citizens Coalition for Change, he was arrested for holding a political gathering that was unauthorized. And this is one of those that confuses me, by the way, most of the times, because I've seen it in Tanzania, I've seen it in Kenya, and I'll be very specific about the instances that I'm talking about. The reason Tundu Lissu was arrested and he's in jail today is because he had a gathering where he actually said a couple of things. But I think one of the most important things they have forget about. Let's forget about his case for a moment, because I cannot say he's innocent or not. I don't live in Tanzania. I just visit Tanzania. But I mean, their laws are very specific on certain things that I am not very much exposed to. However, he's a political leader, and they say that his charges can easily amount to treason. But the thing is that they gather, and when they gather, they are arrested. And it's almost the same in Kenya, where people go out to protest, and when they gather together, many times they're actually arrested. I mean, think about it, how the former deputy president of Kenya he wasn't arrested, but the treatment of people when they were welcoming him from United States. And but also there were also several warnings from the authorities to say you are not going to be allowed to gather. I mean, these things happen in Uganda all the time, that when you cannot gather without notifying the police, which is cuts across, by the way, in most African countries that I've seen. It's not that you're denied the right to gather, but police want to be notified that you're going to gather. But police does not give authority whether you should gather or not. So what happens is that they go ahead and gather, and then eventually they're arrested, unlawful assembly, and things like that. They keep happening. So I'm not surprised that such a thing can be used to go and get the members of the civil society, members of the opposition, members of the opposition leaders, or even party or something like people who are just against the government, and it happens a lot. And in fact, on 16th June, police arrested over 70 people, including Timber himself, at a private event, charging them with participating in a gathering with an intent to promote violence, breach of peace, or bigotry. So they will always find a case that comes out and it will be placed on them. So it's one of those things that is very common, especially in Central Africa. Okay, I'm talking about DRC, I'm talking about Rwanda, I'm talking about Uganda, I'm talking about Kenya, I'm talking about Tanzania, I'm talking about Central African Republic. You can even go to West Africa, by the way. It happens. You'll see it in Nigeria, you'll see it in Cameroon, you'll see it in Ivory Coast, Central African Republic, Mali, Chad, most of those countries. There is a very strict rule when it comes to people gathering together. And many times in those countries, if you look around very well, they've always arrested members of the opposition, or journalists, or members of the civil society, even religious leaders and politicians. They're always thrown in jail for this thing. So would I say that they just picked out they just picked out Zimbabwe? Maybe because maybe they're not in the good bed with the Americans there. But also there was a memorial event of an opposition supporter who was killed in 2022, which was disrupted on June 30th, and several participants were arrested. So those are some of the things that they look at. Like, look, this is a memorial event. So when people gather for a memorial event and they're arrested, does it make any sense? Well, that's one of the pics that I also saw. But also on July 31st, suspected state agents forcibly disappeared 4 activists for nearly 8 hours after pulling them off a plane. And I said this in a previous video, subjecting them to torture and other ill treatment that they say. This is a report that says. There's also another gentleman called Jacob. I can't pronounce his name very well, but I hope I do. I have time, so I can try it out. Ngavri Hume, who is the leader of the Transform Zimbabwe, who was arrested on August 2nd and was charged for allegedly participating in an event where 70 CCC government members, they're not government members, were arrested, and they were granted bail after 82 days. What does the law say about granting people bail in Zimbabwe versus, the time they spent in jail and being on such charges? So it's really a tough report, and every time I look at it here and there on a couple of things, you keep thinking maybe we could have done better. Okay, maybe something better could have been done to prevent unnecessarily chaos. Listen, there's some reports, they say in a larger context of Zimbabwe human rights 2024, it's indicated that there was an intensified crackdown on government critics, particularly ahead of the Southern African Development Community, which is the SADC heads of state, who were supposed to be meeting in Zimbabwe at that time, which was 17th August there. And this crackdown formed of a broader strategy of Zimbabwe authorities to undermine the democratic processes, repress civil society, and also restrict political pluralism. And also, you'll come across where students, I think from the Zimbabwe Union, were also arrested, for meetings. So there's always something just wrong about arresting people who disagree with what the government says. So for me, it's one of those stories that I felt it caught my attention. And once America starts to come out and put these things on your shoulders, already in a bad state Zimbabwe is in, especially when it comes to its inflation, I don't know how far they can go with these restrictions on their shoulders, when there's such reports come out and more sanctions are going to be placed on them. I still don't see a proper relationship between Zimbabwe and America, or proper relationship between Zimbabwe and the UK or the European Union. Apart from trade, what other diplomatic relations do they have that are at stake? Because if this report comes out, the thing that you're going to notice is that the two parties, maybe most times actually initiated by Zimbabwe, is to kind of initiate a conversation with the USA, sit on a table and see how to relax sanctions and also promote trade. But here's my thought. Now, I am going to use this as a transition to the next story, but here's my thought. I believe that if Zimbabwe initiates a conversation with the United States, they are going to get into a conversation of, can you receive deportees from United States? But the sanctions will not go away. However, there are other agreements that they may come across, relaxed, not necessarily relaxed sanctions, but kind of loosen up the tension between the two states. You may not see them. That's the fact. You may not see them. But you always have to ask yourself, how does a country, a report on human rights, come out? And it's the most popular report across Africa or in the world, and it only focuses on Zimbabwe. It means there's something to look at. There's something to target there. But anyway, that's Zimbabwe for you. And speaking of deportees to African countries, this is where I come in with my second story. Uganda and Honduras have agreed to receive deportees. These are asylum seekers whose requests probably have been rejected or revoked eventually. They could have gotten the asylum, but then eventually it has been revoked. And Uganda now joins countries such as Eswatini, South Sudan, Djibouti, to receive asylum seekers, sorry, not even asylum seekers, deportees to these third world countries. And I know that Rwanda also had a deal with the United States. It's just that we don't know how many people are going to be received in Uganda, in Rwanda, in Eswatini. I know they already received 5 in South Sudan. They have been receiving these people. And I kept on telling people, even in the video, some of the last videos that I made in regards to America deporting people in Africa or to Africa, is that it's going to expand. It's not only these countries. There have been conversations with Nigeria. There have been conversations with other countries, including even Kenya, Tanzania. The conversations are there. It's just that they've not made it public yet. But will these countries accept to receive these asylum deportees seekers who are now being deported to third countries? Though in Uganda, the conversation is about that they must cross-check with their history. They must not have a criminal history. And they will help them resettle here. But also, if they have a view of going back to their original countries, that is much welcome by Uganda, because these people go to America, and then when they're deported to other countries, and then later on, if they want, they can actually go back to their countries of origin. So at least that is very much welcome with the Ugandan government, including Rwanda also, which said for them, they are going to look at the history of the people. They must be able to vet. It's them who vet, not the Americans to vet who can be received. So the Rwandans want to be able to vet who is coming into the country, so that they don't, take in also criminal elements. My biggest concern is that African countries are already poor by nature, okay? Very poor. They cannot afford employment for everyone they have. In fact, you find that the central part of Africa has the youngest population in the world. But there's a high level of unemployment, okay? People are not going to school because governments can't afford. The infrastructure is terrible. The people, you look at the infrastructure where people are studying from, it's very terrible. So you cannot, in my wisdom, I'm asking myself, what is at stake if the country said no to deportees? Here's the truth. You will have denied yourself access to so many things, including trade. Uganda and I think another country was strapped off on AGOA. I think even South Africa is strapped off AGOA. Like that, I can cross-check. But those are the consequences, that you will not be able to take your goods to America without paying a high tax. AGOA was technically free. This initiative, I think, was put together by Bush before we saw Obama and all these other things. So these were initiatives that were meant to grow the economies of Africa. But now some of the countries have lost the AGOA agenda to help these African countries. So it's one of those that you may lose some diplomatic relations with those countries, and eventually your country will be plugged into a very difficult time, because people go to the farms, people are innovating all kinds of things that they can do and export to America. But now, because that relationship is not there, it becomes very difficult to take those products into America. So the stakes are high on a business level. However, the burden is also on the African continent, countries, because they have to settle in these people. You have to integrate them by language, by job, by businesses, and all these other things that they want to do, because they must, they not must, but they will be required, of course, to go and fend for themselves. What we don't know is whether there is money that has been given to these countries to kind of facilitate what exactly is happening. So I predict that the countries the number of countries is going to expand, and we cannot avoid that, but we'll see what happens eventually on that. So African countries still welcoming deportees. I don't know who will be the next. Will it be Ghana? Will it be South Africa, where people are running from, apparently, refugees given to the Afrikaners going to America? Maybe the ones they will bring will replace that population that has left. Anyway, my third story, and this is very concerning. It's coming from DRC. Now, I know recently I just talked about the M23 walking away from the Qatar process. Because they felt like the government of Kinshasa, it has actually violated some of the ceasefire agreements that they had with M23. But this is just a little bit connected to what M23 is doing, or largely probably connected to it, because a prosecutor in DRC is asking for a death penalty for the former president, Joseph Kabila. If you're just seeing this for the first time, Joseph Kabila was the president of DRC for nearly 2 decades, or even probably completed the 2 decades there. And he left power in 2018, where Felix Tshisekedi came into power. Even when it's still questionable whether Felix Tshisekedi actually won that election to, take over Kabila. But what is so clear is that Kabila actually helped Felix Tshisekedi come to power. But the relationships between the two people has completely collapsed. Completely. Because they allege that Joseph Kabila, is, in fact, one of the people who's behind the rape, the killings, the attacks from M23, that is literally in bed with the M23 to be able to destabilize the government or the eastern part of Congo. But we know that Kabila has been living in South Africa for a very long time. Okay? Until early this year when he came out and said, look, the problems of DRC, especially in Eastern Congo, is because the government has not done enough to protect its people right there. And feels like the agreements that were made with M23 were broken by the government, the current government that is there. He held a press conference in South Africa, and to make matters worse, he said that, and he actually said that he wanted to come back to DRC to be able to help bring back peace to that eastern part of Congo. In fact, he was actually seen with the M23, picture with M23, picture with leaders and some religious leaders in the eastern part of Congo. Something that didn't go well with the government. And then eventually, the Senate sits down and says they are voting to remove the immunity that President Kabila has been enjoying and the party has been enjoying as a former president, so that he can be prosecuted. And indeed, they voted for it. So he lost his immunity. It means that Joseph Kabila, the next time he steps in DRC, he actually may be arrested. Or if he steps in a country that has very good relations with DRC, for example, they can say, let's arrest him and then, take him back to his country where he's going to be facing the charges that have been put against him. Now, imagine the prosecutors asking for death penalty for Joseph Kabila. And it made me go back to history and say, listen, the head of the M23 we know today was actually the head of Electoral Commission at the time Felix Tshisekedi came into power. Felix Tshisekedi was literally almost handpicked by Joseph Kabila and put him to power. Where did they fall out? What happened? And it's not the first case that I have seen where the president who comes literally goes after his predecessor and completely finishes them. You may be asking, for example, who? Have you seen this in Botswana? Let me not go there. Have you seen this in Angola? Laurent here, who is the president now. You remember Dos Santos? When he left power, he literally gave power to his vice president, who's on today. This guy has gone before for Elizabeth Dos Santos, the richest African woman. The children, the son I think is still in jail. Maybe was released, not sure. They've gone over their wealth and assets. In fact, sued them, closed their banks in Portugal and all these other things. All these things could be done in good faith. And I'm not saying that they did it out of spite. They could have done it because they believed that their heads were stealing from people. There was corruption. And that they are not willing to tolerate it. And so let's go after them so that we put things right and still by the will the love from the people and the support for them to be in the government, to believe that they are working. But they've destroyed friendships and relationships for that. So I don't know how exactly Felix Tshisekedi and Kabila fell out, but it has been massive to the point that now he is a wanted man. In fact, trial is ongoing, but in absentia. It means that the cases that have been put on Kabila are being heard, but because he's not there. So that means that he's an absentia. It means that once he's found guilty, he will be gone. The moment he steps into the country, he'll be arrested, or they can work with their partner states and see whether they can arrest him and take him back to DRC, where he'll face sentence, or maybe the death penalty will come upon him. But yeah, his party itself was banned from participating in any political situation. So, in my view, the staunch supporters of Joseph Kabila are going to completely fall out with the supporters of the government, Felix Tshisekedi. And that is going to cause division amongst Congolese. Now, on top of being poor and exploited as a country and facing a lot of war, you're going to have people divided by political lines, and people who were once friends going separate ways and becoming enemies, and it becomes a very big problem for the government that is there. You look at what's happening in Kenya. Rigathi Gachagua was a deputy president deputizing Ruto. When they fell out and he was impeached, look at how bad it is that Gachagua of Kenya, a former deputy president, speaks things that are supposed to be actually secret by oath regardless of what happens. Yeah, you sign and swear that there is information that will remain a secret for as long as, whether you're in government or you leave government. He's formed his own political party. Look at the chaos in Kenya. The protests, not even the protests, the way police was going hard on his supporters. But you may find that those supporters were actually also Ruto supporters. So it has caused the political lines to become very gray, and that people are no longer separating politics and life, that they now hate and destroy each other. Will this be the case in DRC? I don't know. But subscribe and support the stories that I give you every Saturday, especially when it comes to, my analysis of the big stories of the week. My name is Darren, and I will see you in the next one.